welcome everybody to this meeting of the National Food Strategy, APPG. Today's meeting is on how should the National Food Strategy support rural communities, urban food systems and good food jobs.
I'm Selene Saxby, I'm the MP for North Devon, which is a very rural constituency. I think it's a fascinating topic to look at how we can actually look at supporting rural communities at the same time as urban food systems, where for many of us out here in North Devon, the two are a very long way apart from each other.
I think it's really important to point out that we need to rebalance the food and farming community. We have to reverse serious structural changes. We need to look at the structural problems that the farming industry is facing, particularly small and medium-sized businesses and SMEs. Data this week has shown that we've lost 25% of the farms, these are SMEs effectively, between 2005 and 2016. That the more diversity, not only biological, but economic diversity in our rural economy, the better we will be and the more resilient that economy will be. So key touchstones here are decentralization, diversification, flexibility, and shorter supply chains. The current model, which is, if you like, being generated by an economic set of policies to do with liberalism and neoliberalism on the one hand, but also the common agricultural policy on the other, has stripped out infrastructure. We have, as you know, a new environmental management system proposed, ELMS as it's called. That is not going to deliver the radical rebalancing that we will need. We need to manipulate, and I know this is politically not necessarily always seen as a good idea, but we need to manipulate, every country does it by the way, manipulate market intervention mechanisms in ways which give incentives for instance, the growth in horticultural production, the growth of small supply chains, shorter supply chains. The retailers, corporate retailers, and the food industry might find this as something of a threat. But I don't think it is necessarily a threat. What I'm arguing for here is a much more diversified food supply system, of which the corporate retailers play obviously a significant role. And you can see this developing with urban cities movement, food movements, more urban growing, the development of food hubs, agroecological practices being expanded. We need to be investing as a country in physical infrastructure, but also digital, obviously, but also advisory networks and experimental farms which show farmers, demonstrate what can actually be achieved. There's increasing evidence across Europe, some of which I've been involved in, which has demonstrated that at a microeconomic level, on a farm level, more money, more value added, more multipliers, more employment can actually be generated by the development, for instance, of agroecological practices.
I just wondered how you feel about innovation in agriculture and whether reversing intensification would mean reversing things like, I recall visiting Thanet Earth, which is I think the largest hydroponics growing greenhouses in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think innovation is a key aspect of all this, but we need a broader definition of it. I think we can't just say small is beautiful. I'm not actually saying that. The large commodity sector in food in this country is also going to go through a revolution in various ways. But at the same time, I think we need a much more diverse supply system.
Support for very small holdings under 5 hectares. We didn't do that under the basic payment scheme. There is the opportunity, it seems to me, in the future to redress that. Do you get any sense that under environmental land management, that's what's like to happen?
Well, I'm worried that under ELMS, it's not going to happen, actually. We don't have some form of positive discrimination in there for smaller production or for mixed farming.
Am I allowed to put Lee Abbey on the spot and actually have a response from the Farmers Union to that point?
We do see some major challenges with elms. In horticulture, for example, most horticultural businesses don't take part in the existing environmental schemes. You have to effectively take land out of production to then do something else instead, whereas actually a lot of the farms are doing things either in the margins or in between strips of orchards and things like that. They're not taking land out of production, and therefore they can't go into the scheme. So I think there is massive opportunity in a new environmental scheme to just better reflect the way that farms operate.
I've just come off the EFRA Select Committee. There's been a few grumbles about the lack of consultation by DEFRA to certainly small farm holdings.
As a union, we have members right across the food chain, from plough to plate or from farm to fork, however you want to express it, plus all the associated industries as well, such as logistics, packaging, public health. And I wanted to I think the word might be problematise the expression of good food jobs. So when we're talking about good food jobs, are we talking about good quality jobs in the food system, or are we talking about jobs that are making good food? We can contrast two kind of models. You've got company A that may be making quotes unquote bad food, so HFSS food, high in fat, sugar and salt, but it's got established decent paying conditions, it's got union recognition, it's got union safety reps, it's got pension scheme. Or you've got company B, which is maybe a startup making quotes unquote good food, perhaps kind of plant-based burger alternatives, but it's produced in a dark kitchen model. The Royal Society for Public Health described dark kitchens as small boxes where food is produced in dark, cramped and low-paid environments. And then the delivery of the product is by gig economy couriers, where they have their own issues about working conditions. So when we're talking about good food jobs, what do we mean? And what we could mean, and what hopefully the ambition, the goal of the National Food Strategy will be good food, good jobs in a food industry making good food. In terms of food's role in shaping communities, obviously it provides a major role in providing jobs, with millions working in the food system, millions more in all those associated industries that I mentioned. The knock-on impact of either a site being set up or closing, it can have a really massive impact, perhaps on smaller or medium-sized communities in a way that perhaps is a bit under accounted for. So the food systems have got this vital role in providing jobs and shaping communities, but perhaps more importantly, it's working within a financial system. So shareholders, investors, private equity, hedge funds, venture capital, pension funds, foreign governments. So global money makes the framework for local jobs, whether they're urban, rural, or everything in between. And there's a big question there on how to reconcile the goals and ambitions that Terry outlined in his presentation with that harsh reality, I think.
Bristol Food Union is a new social enterprise we formed specifically as a Bristol food community response to the COVID crisis. One of the things I think we all became aware of very, very quickly was that the margins in running an ethical or sustainable or just an independently owned food enterprise in this country have been squeezed significantly since 2016 onwards, whether it's the increase in VAT, the national minimum wage, the impact of Brexit and the loss of European staff, or the increase in importing European produce. Restaurants were very, very much dependent on month-to-month cash liquidity. So when the crisis hit, found themselves in very difficult financial situations very quickly. There was a great impact on the hospitality supply chain in a way that really highlighted to us the extent to which we essentially operate a two-tier food system in the UK now. The majority of people in the UK will do their weekly Monday to Friday shop at one of the major retailers and are part of a food system that's very much globalized, industrialized, and some of our highest quality, most ethical, sustainable, and in my opinion, delicious producers here in the UK were almost completely beholden to the hospitality supply chain. We became very conscious that the public were going to need to know quite quickly where they could access good food from. And that's an element of the project that we're very much carrying forward now that the pandemic is finished, really trying to signpost the public and grow demand in the marketplace for local, ethical, sustainable food products. As we now go forwards, we're beginning to develop programmes alongside Bristol City Council, looking at how do we bring more young people into food farming and hospitality careers in Bristol. What we're really seeing now in Bristol is chronic understaffing across food farming and hospitality businesses. It's very much that middle swathe of people with high quality existing food and hospitality skills that there seems to be a significant shortage of at the moment.
Production, agriculture and horticulture employs around 480,000 people in permanent roles, plus another 80,000 seasonal workers, which are predominantly in the horticulture, but also the poultry sectors. It's true to say that many rural communities have been built around farming. A lot of other farming businesses and jobs are reliant on it, whether that's specialist services or suppliers. And of course, in the rural areas, there's local shops, post offices, etc., which remain viable because of the people that live and work in those areas. The prices we pay for fruit and veg on the supermarket shelves is largely the same as it was about 20 years ago. The way to keep competitive in both the permanent and seasonal roles, of course, is challenged by this relentless drive for cheaper food from the supply chain. And of course, there's also a drive for increasing standards. And the two can't be compatible.
Whatever the food supply chain is producing in terms of profits at the moment, I think if you looked at the way it was being sliced up, it's skewing towards the top end of the supply chain rather than the production end of the supply chain. And that's not fair and not good in anyone's best interest, really, for the long term and for a more sort of sustainable future.
I'm going to move on, and a question from Andrea in the chat, who says, what would happen to those who are not highly skilled?
I just think we need to be careful as well about what we consider to be highly skilled work or not skilled work. And I think a lot of our rural food producing communities have an awful lot of cultural and food production knowledge that maybe hasn't been gathered in quite the same way as we are used to with qualifications and degrees and exams.
I was just going to comment on the question of new entrants and how we encourage people to come into agriculture. DEFRA are discussing new entrants within the new agricultural policy and opportunity to encourage farmers to potentially retire and create new opportunities for new entrants to come in. There is a new body that's now being created called the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture, TIER, which it will be a new professional body, which will create a much more dynamic and consolidated effort to provide a professional image for agriculture and horticulture.
We're largely an urban population, and the urban population have had very little, if any, links whatsoever with the rural community and farming roles and so on. And it's so alien, they just don't even consider it. We've got careers advisors that don't really understand it. There's a lot of education required for people to even think about farming industries.
I just would like the panel's view, if they have one, on what we're experiencing in rural Lincolnshire, which is a complete disconnect between the food economy and food citizenship.
I think one of the things that really came out of the pandemic for us was that it doesn't serve the interests of anybody for the various elements of food sectors or food industries to be quite as siloized as they are. And so I think if we could find a framework or a structure that concentrates on building healthy participative food communities where citizens were involved, that the socioeconomic outputs or the health outputs that we would get as a result of that approach would be much more significant than working in silos.
So we haven't mentioned supermarkets as food businesses that have a key role to play in actually supporting this agenda, I think.
We have the toughest retail environment in the world, I'm sure. Price is king with many consumers. I know it's not the only factor, but it is king for many consumers. So one thing I will say in defense of retailers, things have improved in certain aspects in recent years. Generally speaking, they are supportive of British produce. During the British season, you will predominantly find British products on shelves. But of course, because price is so key in this, the bottom line is that British producers can't always compete. What's critical for us is to make sure that that we're on a level playing field, that they expect the same standards of their imported produce as they do of their UK produce.
We're locked into a system of not respecting UK seasonality, meeting the need for non-seasonal foods from the global south. But of course, those are now very important cash crops for the global south. So there's really a complicated situation that we've kind of worked ourselves into for whatever reason, and extracting ourselves and changing those systems will have global consequences as well as national ones.
It seems very clear from the horticulture elms trial I've been running that it's actually supermarket practices that are driving a lot of the poor environment and labour practices that elms is trying to address, and without actually looking towards a greater proportion of food being supplied through local or farmer focused supply chains, we're not actually going to be addressing a lot of the negative externalities that elms aims to address.
Thank you to all of our panelists this afternoon.
I think we've covered a huge range of topics, and you know, and yet the National Food Strategy covers so much more, and that is the challenge, isn't it, for us all, that we recognise that the entire ecosystem around food is highly complex.